In the misty halls of Crestwood Manor, a scream shatters the dawn. Charles Ashbourne lies dead, a dagger in his heart. Hercule Poirot, the master of mysteries, steps into a web of secrets, debts and betrayal. A stopped clock, a hidden staircase, a cryptic note, and a shadowy figure named Fenton point to a cunning killer among the household. As Poirot's grey cells unravel lies, one truth emerges: no one is what they seem. Can he trap the murderer before they strike again? Chapter 1. The arrival at Crestwood Manor. The train from London shuddered to a halt at Crestwood Halt, a desolate platform nestled in the heart of Devon's mist-shrouded hills. Hercule Poirot, his polished shoes gleaming despite the damp, descended with the precision of a man who valued order above all. His waxed moustache, a testament to his meticulous nature, quivered slightly in the chill morning air. He adjusted his Homburg hat and surveyed the scene with keen, almond-shaped eyes. His grey cells, already alert to the mystery that had summoned him. A letter, penned in an elegant but tremulous hand, had arrived at his London flat 2 days prior. Lady Eleanor Ashbourne, mistress of Crestwood Manor, had written of a matter too delicate for correspondence, and urged his immediate presence. The vagueness of her words, coupled with a hint of fear beneath her aristocratic restraint, intrigued Poirot. He had accepted the invitation, sensing that beneath the surface of this quiet countryside lay a puzzle worthy of his intellect. A chauffeur, clad in a dark uniform, awaited him with a sleek Bentley. The drive to Crestwood Manor wound through lanes flanked by ancient oaks, their branches heavy with autumn dew. The manor itself emerged from the fog like a sentinel, its Georgian facade imposing yet weathered, as if burdened by secrets. Ivy clung to its stone walls, and the tall windows reflected the grey sky with an air of melancholy. Lady Eleanor greeted Poirot in the grand hall, her auburn hair swept into a chignon, streaked with silver that spoke of both age and strain. Her green eyes, though sharp, were shadowed by fatigue, and her handshake was firm but fleeting. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low and cultured, "your reputation precedes you. I am grateful you have come so swiftly. There is an atmosphere in this house that unsettles me." "Madam," Poirot replied, bowing slightly, "Hercule Poirot is at your service. Pray, tell me of this atmosphere, for it is in the subtleties that truth often hides." They adjourned to the drawing-room, a cavernous space adorned with portraits of stern-faced ancestors and a roaring fire that did little to dispel the chill. Over tea served in delicate porcelain, Lady Eleanor outlined her concerns. "It began a fortnight ago," she explained. "Whispers in the corridors, glances exchanged when one thinks oneself unobserved. Last night, I overheard a conversation, muffled, but the word murder was unmistakable. I could not identify the speakers, but I fear for the safety of my household." Poirot's fingers steepled, a habit when his mind was most engaged. "And who, madame, comprises this household?" Lady Eleanor introduced the key figures with measured precision. Her nephew, Charles Ashbourne, aged 32, was a man of charm but little ambition, prone to gambling and debts. "He is dear to me," she admitted, "but reckless." Miss Clara Vance, her companion of 3 years, was a woman of 30, reserved and observant, with a penchant for reading obscure novels. Dr. Henry Thornton, a widower and the village physician, was a frequent visitor, his medical expertise matched by a quiet loyalty to the family. The housekeeper, Mrs. Beatrice Lang, ruled the staff with an iron hand, though her stern exterior seemed to mask unease. The butler, Mr. Grayson, was a man of middle age, formal to a fault, while Lily, the young maid, was nervous and easily startled. As they spoke, Poirot noted the dynamics of the room. Clara entered briefly to retrieve a shawl, her movements silent, her eyes lingering on Lady Eleanor with an unreadable expression. Dr. Thornton arrived to join them for luncheon, his manner genial but guarded. Mrs. Lang supervised the serving of the meal, her lips pursed as if disapproving of the very air. Grayson moved with mechanical precision, while Lily darted about, her hands trembling as she poured the wine. The meal was interrupted by a piercing scream from the hall. Lily burst into the dining room, her face ashen, her apron twisted in her hands. "Monsieur Poirot! My lady! It's Mr. Charles. He's dead, in the library, stabbed through the heart." The room froze, the clatter of cutlery silenced. Poirot rose, his calm demeanour a stark contrast to the chaos. "Lead me to him, mademoiselle," he said, his voice steady, "and let us see what story this tragedy will tell." Chapter 2. The Scene of the Crime. The library of Crestwood Manor, with its towering shelves and heavy velvet drapes, was a sanctuary of knowledge now desecrated by violence. Hercule Poirot entered with measured steps, his sharp eyes scanning the scene where Charles Ashbourne lay lifeless. The young man was slumped in a high-backed leather armchair, his head tilted at an unnatural angle, a silver-handled dagger embedded in his chest. Blood had seeped into his white shirt, staining it a grim crimson, and his once handsome face was frozen in a grimace of surprise. The air carried the faint metallic tang of blood, mingling with the musty scent of old books. Poirot's gaze swept the room, noting every detail with the precision of a watchmaker. The library was in disarray, a mahogany table overturned, several volumes of Gibbon's Decline and Fall scattered across the Persian rug, and a crystal decanter of brandy shattered near the hearth. A tall window stood ajar, its latch unfastened, admitting a chilly breeze that rustled the papers on a nearby desk. Most curious was the ormolu clock on the mantelpiece, its hands frozen at 5:30, though Poirot's pocket watch confirmed the time as 7 o'clock. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, "this clock, it tells a story of its own." Inspector Reed, a burly man with a weathered face and a no-nonsense demeanour, arrived promptly with 2 constables. His boots thudded against the polished floor as he surveyed the scene, his brow furrowed. "Nasty business, Monsieur Poirot," he said, scratching his chin. "Looks like a burglary gone wrong, or perhaps a crime of passion. That dagger's no common blade. Ornate, expensive. Not the sort you'd find in a poacher's kit." Poirot nodded, his fingers tracing the edge of his moustache. "A burglary, you say? Yet nothing appears stolen, and the disorder seemed staged. No, Inspector, this is a crime of calculation. We must examine the facts with care." Kneeling beside the body, Poirot studied Charles Ashbourne's remains. The dagger had pierced the heart with surgical precision, suggesting a single, forceful blow. The wound was fresh, but rigor mortis had begun to set in, indicating death had occurred at least 2 hours prior, likely around 5 in the morning. Poirot's gloved hand carefully extracted a crumpled piece of paper from Charles's waistcoat pocket. Unfolding it, he read the words scrawled in black ink, "You will pay for your betrayal." The handwriting was angular, the ink still faintly wet, suggesting it had been written shortly before the murder. "This note," Poirot said, passing it to Reed, "is a clue, but also a challenge. Who is betrayed, and by whom?" The inspector bagged the note as evidence, while Poirot turned his attention to the overturned table. Among the scattered books, he found a silver cigarette case engraved with Charles's initials. Its lid sprung open, revealing a single cigarette stained with a trace of lipstick. "Interesting," Poirot mused. "A lady's presence, perhaps, or another attempt to mislead." He moved to the open window, examining the sill. There were no footprints in the dew-soaked grass outside, nor any signs of forced entry. The latch was undamaged, suggesting the window had been opened from within. "If the murderer fled this way," Poirot said to Reed, "they were remarkably careful, or perhaps they never left the house." The household, summoned by Lady Eleanor, gathered in the doorway, their faces a tableau of shock and suspicion. Lady Eleanor herself stood rigid, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes fixed on her nephew's body. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, "who could have done this to Charles? He was reckless, yes, but to die so brutally." Poirot turned to her, his expression grave yet reassuring. "Madame, Hercule Poirot will find the truth, but I must ask each of you where you were between 4 and 6 this morning." Clara Vance, her dark hair pinned neatly, spoke first. "I was in my room, reading. I often stay up late with a book and sleep poorly. I heard nothing unusual." Her voice was steady, but her fingers toyed with a pearl brooch, betraying a flicker of unease. Dr. Henry Thornton, his medical bag in hand, stepped forward. "I was called to the village at 4:30 to attend Mrs. Harrow, who had taken ill. I returned only after 6. His tone was professional, but his eyes lingered on the dagger, a shadow crossing his face. Mrs. Beatrice Lang, the housekeeper, straightened her apron. "I was in the kitchen, preparing for the day. Lily was with me, polishing silver. We heard nothing until the scream." Her voice was firm, but her hands trembled slightly, and Poirot noted a faint flush on her cheeks. Lily, the young maid, nodded vigorously, her eyes wide with fear. "It's true, sir. I was with Mrs. Lang. I didn't see anything, I swear." Her voice broke, and she clutched her apron as if it were a lifeline. Mr. Grayson, the butler, was conspicuously absent from the initial gathering. When summoned, he appeared, his face pale but composed. "I was in my quarters, Monsieur Poirot," he said. "I rose at 6 to begin my duties. I have no knowledge of what occurred before." His formality was impeccable, yet Poirot detected a slight hesitation in his delivery. Inspector Reed scribbled notes, his skepticism evident. "A fine lot of alibis," he muttered. "All tucked away, no one hearing a thing. Convenient, isn't it?" Poirot's eyes twinkled with quiet amusement. "Convenient, yes, but truth is rarely so accommodating. These alibis, they are like a tapestry, beautifully woven, but with threads that may unravel under scrutiny." He returned to the clock, lifting it carefully. A faint scratch marred its brass base, and a closer inspection revealed a tiny piece of cloth caught in the mechanism. A fragment of grey wool, fine and well woven. "This clock was stopped deliberately," Poirot announced. "Not by accident, but by design. Someone wished to obscure the time of death." "Why?" Lady Eleanor gasped. "But who would do such a thing? And why Charles?" Poirot did not answer immediately, instead examining the desk. Among the papers, he found a telegram dated the previous day, addressed to Charles from an unknown sender. "Meet me at dawn. Urgent. R.F." The initials intrigued him. "Madam," he asked Lady Eleanor, "do these letters, R.F., mean anything to you?" Her face paled. "Roger Fenton, perhaps. A former associate of my late husband. Charles mentioned him recently, said he'd resurfaced after years of absence, but I know little more." Poirot nodded, filing the name away. "We shall see what Monsieur Fenton has to tell us. For now, Inspector, secure the room. No one must disturb the scene." As the constables cordoned off the library, Poirot stepped into the hall, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The stopped clock, the cryptic note, the lipstick-stained cigarette, the open window, were pieces of a puzzle that refused to align. Yet he felt the stirrings of understanding, the first threads of order emerging from chaos. "The grey cells," he said softly to himself. "They begin to see the shape of this crime. It is not random, but a performance, staged for an audience of one. Hercule Poirot." He turned to Inspector Reed, who was issuing orders to his men. "We must proceed with method, Inspector. The murderer believes they have outwitted us, but they have left footprints in the sand of their own making. We shall follow them." The manor seemed to hold its breath as Poirot began his investigation, the weight of the crime settling over Crestwood like the morning mist. Somewhere within these walls a killer lurked, their motives veiled but not invisible. Poirot's task was clear: to pierce that veil and bring the truth to light. Chapter 3. The hidden motives. The morning sun struggled through the heavy clouds over Crestwood Manor, casting a pallid light across the grounds. Hercule Poirot stood in the rose garden, his gloved hands clasped behind his back, his mind sifting through the details of the previous day's grim discovery. The murder of Charles Ashbourne was no impulsive act. It bore the hallmarks of premeditation, and Poirot sensed that the motives lay buried in the tangled relationships of the household. To unearth them, he would need to probe with the precision of a surgeon, cutting through deception to reveal the truth. He began with Lily, the young maid whom he found polishing brass in the scullery. Her hands trembled as she worked, and her eyes darted nervously toward the door. "Mademoiselle Lily," Poirot said, his tone gentle yet firm, "you are afraid, are you not? Tell me what you know of Monsieur Charles, and speak freely, for Hercule Poirot values the truth above all." Lily hesitated, her cloth pausing mid-motion. "Mr. Charles was kind, sir, always had a smile for me. But he was in trouble, I could tell. 2 nights ago, I heard him in the hall, arguing with someone. His voice was loud, angry, something about money owed. I couldn't hear the other voice, but it sounded sharp, like they were threatening him." She glanced toward the kitchen door, lowering her voice. "I didn't dare stay to listen. Mrs. Lang would have had my hide if she caught me eavesdropping." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "This argument, it was late, yes? And you saw no one else?" Lily shook her head, her cheeks flushing. "No, sir. I went back to my duties, but I think someone else was awake that night. I saw a light under Miss Vance's door as I passed." This detail intrigued Poirot, and he made a mental note to revisit it. Thanking Lily, he sought out Clara Vance, finding her in the conservatory, seated with a volume of Brontë in her lap. Her dark eyes met his with a cool steadiness, but Poirot detected a flicker of wariness. "Miss Vance," he began, settling opposite her, "you are an observer of human nature, are you not? What did you know of Charles Ashbourne's troubles?" Clara closed her book with deliberate care. "Charles was a fool, Monsieur Poirot. Charming but reckless. He confided in me once, after too much wine, that he owed money to dangerous men, lenders who do not forgive debts. I advised him to settle his affairs, but he laughed it off, said he had a plan to outwit them." Her lips tightened. "I fear his plan failed." Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but piercing. "And this plan? Did he share its nature? Or perhaps you overheard something, as Lily did 2 nights ago." Clara's fingers tightened on the book, but her expression remained composed. "I heard nothing, monsieur. I keep to myself. Charles's troubles were his own." Her reticence was a challenge, and Poirot shifted tactics. "You were awake late that night, were you not? A light was seen under your door." Clara's eyes flickered, but she recovered swiftly. "I often read late. Insomnia is my companion. I saw nothing unusual." Poirot nodded, sensing she was guarding a secret, but he did not press further. The truth, he knew, would emerge in time. Next he sought Dr. Henry Thornton, who was in the village surgery, but agreed to meet Poirot at the manor's gatehouse. The doctor, a man of 50 with a lined face and steady hands, exuded the calm of one accustomed to crises. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, offering a chair, "this is a terrible affair. Charles was a patient of mine, though not often. He came to me last week, complaining of nerves. He believed someone was watching him, following his movements." Poirot's interest sharpened. "Watching him? Did he name this person?" Thornton shook his head. "No, he was vague, almost paranoid. I prescribed a mild sedative, but he seemed unconvinced it would help. I thought it was the strain of his debts, nothing more." The doctor paused, then added, "He did mention a name, Fenton, said he'd crossed paths with him again, and it wasn't pleasant." "Fenton. Poirot repeated, recalling Lady Eleanor's mention of Roger Fenton. "This is most significant. Did Charles say where or when he saw this man?" Thornton frowned. "No, only that it stirred old troubles. I didn't press him. He was agitated enough." Returning to the manor, Poirot reflected on these revelations. Charles's debts, his argument, his fear of being watched, all pointed to a web of intrigue. The mention of Fenton suggested a connection to the past, but Poirot suspected the present held the key. He requested a private audience with Lady Eleanor, finding her in her private sitting room, surrounded by family photographs and fading tapestries. "Madame," he said, bowing, "your nephew's troubles seem to extend beyond mere debt. This Roger Fenton, tell me all you know of him." Lady Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap. "Roger was my husband's partner in a shipping venture years ago. They quarrelled over funds, and Roger vanished after the business collapsed. Charles mentioned recently that he'd heard Roger was back, living nearby under a new name. I thought it gossip, but now," her voice faltered, "could he have harmed Charles?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "It is possible, madame, but we must not leap to conclusions. The motives here are many, and the truth lies in their intersection." He paused, then asked, "Did Charles have enemies within this house? Someone who resented his recklessness, perhaps?" Lady Eleanor hesitated. Charles was charming, but he could be thoughtless. Mrs. Lang disapproved of his late nights, and Grayson once complained of his demands. Clara, she kept her distance, but I sensed she knew more of his affairs than she let on. Her voice dropped. "I fear I failed him, Monsieur Poirot. I should have been stricter." Poirot placed a reassuring hand on hers. "Do not blame yourself, madame. The fault lies with the one who wielded the dagger, and Hercule Poirot will find them." As he left the sitting room, Poirot's mind churned. Lily's account of the argument, Clara's guarded demeanour, Thornton's revelation of Charles's paranoia, and the shadow of Roger Fenton formed a complex tapestry. The cigarette case with its trace of lipstick lingered in his thoughts. Whose lips had left that mark? And why had Clara been awake so late? The grey cells, as he called them, were assembling the fragments, but the picture remained incomplete. He paused in the hall, gazing at a portrait of Charles' late father, Sir Reginald Ashbourne, whose stern eyes seemed to watch him. "The past and the present," Poirot murmured. "They are entwined in this crime. But it is the living who hold the answers." With a determined nod, he resolved to unravel the motives hidden within Crestwood Manor, knowing that each conversation brought him closer to the heart of the mystery. Chapter 4. The Clue of the Broken Clock. The afternoon light filtered through the leaded windows of Crestwood Manor, casting intricate patterns on the polished floors. Yet the atmosphere within remained heavy with suspicion. Hercule Poirot, his mind a whirl of calculated deductions, returned to the library where Charles Ashbourne had met his untimely end. The room, now silent save for the faint creak of the manor's ancient timbers, held secrets that Poirot was determined to uncover. His attention was drawn once more to the ormolu clock on the mantelpiece. Its hands stilled at 5:30, a deliberate act, he was certain, designed to obscure the true time of the murder. Poirot examined the clock with meticulous care, his gloved fingers tracing the faint scratch on its brass base. The fragment of grey wool he had noted earlier was still lodged in the mechanism, a silent witness to tampering. "This clock," he murmured, "it was stopped not by accident, but by intent. The murderer wished to mislead us, to create confusion. But why?" He summoned Mr. Grayson, the butler, whose formal demeanour had thus far revealed little. Grayson entered, his posture rigid, his face a mask of professionalism. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, bowing slightly, "you wished to see me?" "Oui, Monsieur Grayson," Poirot replied, holding up the clock. "You are responsible for the winding of the clocks in this house, are you not? Tell me, when did you last attend to this one?" Grayson's eyes flicked to the clock, a momentary unease betraying his composure. "I wound it yesterday morning, sir, as is my custom. It was functioning perfectly then." His voice was steady, but Poirot noted the slight tightening of his jaw. "And yet," Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild, "it stopped at 5:30 this morning, hours before its winding should have failed. Curious, non? Have you an explanation?" Grayson hesitated, then shook his head. "None, sir. Perhaps it was jostled during the incident." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Perhaps, but Hercule Poirot does not believe in accidents where murder is concerned. You may go for now." As Grayson retreated, Poirot's grey cells churned. The butler's alibi for the early hours was unverified, and his unease suggested more than mere discomfort at the crime. Turning his attention to Charles's personal effects, Poirot requested access to his bedroom, a spacious chamber overlooking the manor's formal gardens. The room was orderly, save for a desk cluttered with papers and a half-empty bottle of brandy. Poirot's keen eyes spotted a faint irregularity in the desk's surface, a panel that, when pressed, revealed a hidden compartment. Inside was a leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with meticulous entries. The records detailed payments, some as recent as the previous week, to an individual identified only as R.F. The sums were substantial, totaling thousands of pounds, and annotations suggested Charles was desperate to settle these debts. "A blackmailer, perhaps," Poirot mused aloud, his fingers tracing the entries. One note caught his eye. "Meeting with R.F. Dawn 28th. The date of the murder." The ledger was a treasure trove, but it raised more questions than it answered. Was R.F. the killer or a scapegoat? And why had Charles hidden this ledger so carefully? Poirot summoned Lady Eleanor to the drawing-room, presenting the ledger with a flourish. "Madame, this was found in your nephew's room. These payments to R.F. Do they confirm your suspicion of Roger Fenton?" Lady Eleanor's face drained of colour as she scanned the pages. "It must be him," she whispered. "Roger Fenton was a shadow over our family. After his disgrace, he swore vengeance on my husband. If Charles crossed him—" Her voice broke, and she pressed a hand to her lips. "Vengeance is a powerful motive," Poirot agreed, "but we must verify this Fenton's role. Tell me, madame, was Charles expecting a visitor yesterday morning?" Lady Eleanor frowned, then nodded slowly. "He mentioned something about an early appointment, but he was vague. I assumed it was a creditor." Poirot's mind raced. The ledger, the stopped clock, the telegram from R.F. all pointed to a rendezvous gone fatally wrong. Yet the absence of footprints outside the library window suggested the killer was someone within the manor, or at least familiar with its secrets. He resolved to investigate the manor's layout further, suspecting there were passages or exits yet undiscovered. He returned to the library, this time examining the walls and floorboards. Behind a heavy bookcase, he found a concealed panel, its edges worn from use. With effort, he slid it open, revealing a narrow staircase descending to the servants' quarters. "Voila!" he exclaimed softly. "A route for a murderer to vanish unseen. This changes the picture." To test his theory, Poirot descended the staircase, emerging in a dimly lit corridor near the kitchen. Mrs. Lang, startled by his sudden appearance, dropped a tray of cutlery. "Monsieur Poirot, what are you doing here?" she demanded, her stern facade cracking. "Exploring the hidden paths of Crestwood Manor," Poirot replied, his eyes studying her reaction. "This staircase, it is known to the staff, yes?" Mrs. Lang's lips pursed. "It's an old passage, rarely used. Only Grayson and I know of it, for maintenance purposes." Her voice was clipped, and Poirot sensed she was concealing something. "And yet," he pressed, "it leads directly to the library. A convenient escape for one who wished to avoid detection." Mrs. Lang's eyes darted away, and she busied herself with the scattered cutlery. "I know nothing of that, sir. I was in the kitchen at dawn, as I told you." Poirot did not challenge her further, but her agitation was noted. The hidden staircase suggested the murderer was intimately familiar with the manor's secrets, narrowing the circle of suspects. Was Grayson, with his access to the passage, more involved than he claimed? Or was Mrs. Lang's nervousness a sign of guilt? As evening approached, Poirot sat in the drawing-room, sipping tea and reviewing his findings. The ledger pointed to blackmail, the clock to deception, and the staircase to opportunity. Yet the motives remained elusive. Charles's debts were a thread, but the presence of R.F. and the lipstick-stained cigarette case hinted at personal betrayals. The puzzle, Poirot said to himself. It is like a mosaic, each piece distinct yet part of a whole. Hercule Poirot will assemble it, piece by piece. He resolved to confront the mysterious R.F. and uncover the truth behind Charles's final meeting. The manor's inhabitants, he knew, were watching him, their secrets guarded but not impenetrable. With his grey cells at their sharpest, Poirot felt the net tightening around the killer, even as the shadows of Crestwood Manor grew darker. Chapter 5. The Shadow of Roger Fenton. The mist had lifted from the Devon hills, but a sense of unease lingered over Crestwood Manor as Hercule Poirot prepared to pursue the elusive figure of Roger Fenton. The ledger's cryptic entries, the telegram signed R.F., and Lady Eleanor's recollection of a disgraced business partner pointed to a man who might hold the key to Charles Ashbourne's murder. Poirot, his mind as sharp as the morning air, resolved to track down this shadow from the past, certain that Fenton's role, whether culprit or catalyst, would illuminate the motives behind the crime. Accompanied by Inspector Reed, Poirot set out for the village of Little Crestwood, where rumours placed Fenton living under an assumed name. The inspector, his scepticism tempered by Poirot's reputation, drove the police motor car along narrow lanes, the hedgerows glistening with dew. "If this Fenton's our man," Reed said, gripping the wheel, "he's been clever to stay hidden so long. But why kill Charles now, after all these years?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "That, Inspector, is the question. A grudge nursed in silence may erupt with sudden violence, but Hercule Poirot suspects there is more. A transaction, perhaps, that turned deadly." He adjusted his scarf, his thoughts returning to the hidden staircase and the stopped clock, clues that suggested an intimate knowledge of the manor. They arrived at a dilapidated cottage on the village outskirts, its thatched roof sagging and its garden overgrown with nettles. A gaunt man with a weathered face and a nervous tic answered their knock. His eyes, pale and restless, widened at the sight of Reed's uniform. "Roger Fenton?" Poirot inquired, his tone courteous but probing. The man hesitated, then nodded. "I'm Fenton. What's this about?" His voice was hoarse, as if long unused, and his fingers twitched at his side. Poirot noted a faint scar above his brow, a detail that matched Lady Eleanor's description of her husband's former partner. "We are investigating the murder of Charles Ashbourne," Poirot said, watching Fenton closely. "Your name has surfaced in connection with his affairs. You will tell us, monsieur, of your dealings with him." Fenton's face hardened, and he gestured them inside. The cottage was sparsely furnished, its air heavy with the scent of damp wood and stale tobacco. A locked drawer in a rickety desk caught Poirot's eye, its brass handle gleaming incongruously in the dim light. "I haven't seen Charles in years," Fenton insisted, seating himself stiffly. "I left that life behind after the business with Sir Reginald collapsed. I've kept to myself, living quietly." His words were rehearsed, but his gaze darted to the drawer, betraying unease. Poirot's smile was disarming. "And yet, monsieur, Charles received a telegram from R.F., arranging a meeting at dawn on the day of his death. You deny sending it?" Fenton's tic intensified, and he shook his head. "I sent no telegram. Someone's using my name to stir trouble." Sensing an opportunity, Poirot engaged Fenton in small talk about the village, his manner genial. Meanwhile, Inspector Reed, at a subtle nod from Poirot, slipped to the desk and quietly forced the drawer. Inside was a letter, its paper yellowed but its contents damning. A demand from Charles for repayment of an old debt, dated a month prior, with a threat to expose Fenton's new identity. Reed held it up, and Fenton's composure cracked. "That's private," he snapped, lunging forward, but Reed restrained him. "Monsieur Fenton," Poirot said, his voice now steely, "this letter suggests you had reason to fear Charles. Did you meet him at dawn to settle this debt with a dagger?" Fenton's face flushed with panic. "No, I was here, alone. I didn't even know he was at the manor until you told me." Poirot studied him, unconvinced but intrigued. Fenton's fear seemed genuine, yet his denial lacked the ring of truth. "We shall see," Poirot said. "For now, you will remain available to the inspector." As they left, Poirot whispered to Reed, "He knows more than he admits, but he is not our killer. The true culprit is closer to home." Back at the manor, Poirot sought out Mrs. Beatrice Lang, whose nervous demeanour in the servants' corridor had piqued his suspicion. He found her in the pantry, inventorying preserves with a meticulousness that bordered on obsession. "Madame Lang," he began, his tone soothing, "you have served this house faithfully, yet I sense you carry a burden. Tell me of the man you saw in the garden at dawn yesterday." Mrs. Lang's hands froze, a jar of marmalade trembling in her grip. "I told you, monsieur. I thought it was a poacher. A shadow moving near the yew hedge, that's all." Her voice was tight, and Poirot pressed gently. A shadow who knew the grounds well, perhaps? One who resembled Monsieur Fenton? Her eyes widened, and after a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "He looked like him, yes, but it was dark. I can't be sure." Poirot's mind raced. Fenton's cottage was a mile away, yet Mrs. Lang's description suggested a man familiar with the manor's layout. Was Fenton lying, or had someone impersonated him to deflect suspicion? The hidden staircase loomed in Poirot's thoughts, a pathway that only a few like Mrs. Lang and Grayson knew intimately. He thanked her and withdrew, pausing in the hall to consider the lipstick-stained cigarette case. It suggested a woman's involvement, yet none of the female suspects, Clara, Mrs. Lang, or Lily, admitted to smoking. Clara's guarded nature and late-night wakefulness made her a likely candidate, but Poirot required evidence, not supposition. As he pondered, Inspector Reed joined him, reporting that Fenton had no alibi for the early hours, and that the village postmaster confirmed a telegram sent in his name, though the sender's identity was unverified. "Someone's playing a clever game," Reed said, frustration evident. "This Ariflud's business feels like a red herring." "Perhaps," Poirot replied, his eyes twinkling. "But even a red herring reveals the hand that placed it. The murderer believes they have outwitted us, but they have left traces, Fenton's name, the staircase, the clock. These are not accidents but signposts to the truth." Poirot resolved to scrutinize the household further, particularly Grayson, whose access to the hidden staircase and unverified whereabouts made him a figure of interest. The shadow of Roger Fenton, whether real or fabricated, was a piece of the puzzle, but the heart of the crime lay within Crestwood Manor's walls. As the day waned, Poirot felt the threads of the mystery tightening, each clue a step closer to unmasking the killer who had struck at dawn. Chapter 6. The Unseen Witness. The twilight cast long shadows across Crestwood Manor, deepening the air of foreboding that clung to its ancient walls. Hercule Poirot, his mind a crucible of deduction, paced the grand hall, his polished shoes clicking softly against the marble. The hidden staircase, the ledger's cryptic entries, and the spectre of Roger Fenton had sharpened his focus. But a new thread demanded his attention. The unseen witness who had observed the events leading to Charles Ashbourne's murder. Someone within the manor, he was certain, held knowledge they had yet to reveal, and Poirot intended to uncover it with his characteristic precision. He began with Lily, the nervous maid, whose earlier disclosure of an argument had hinted at her proximity to the crime's undercurrents. Finding her in the servants' dining room, folding linens with trembling hands, Poirot adopted a gentle tone. "Mademoiselle Lily," he said, seating himself opposite her, "you have eyes that see much, even if fear bids you to remain silent. Tell me, did you witness anything unusual near the library staircase at dawn yesterday?" Lily's hands stilled, her eyes darting to the door as if expecting an eavesdropper. I shouldn't say, Monsieur Poirot," she whispered. "Mrs. Lang would dismiss me if she knew I was speaking out of turn." Poirot leaned forward, his voice soothing yet insistent. "You have my word, mademoiselle. Your confidence is safe with Hercule Poirot. Speak, and help me bring justice to Monsieur Charles." After a moment's hesitation, Lily's resolve crumbled. "I was up early, sir, fetching water for the morning trays. As I passed the corridor near the library staircase, I saw Miss Vance. She was standing there, near the hidden panel, looking watchful, like she was waiting for something. It was just before dawn, maybe 5 o'clock. I didn't think much of it then, but after what happened—" Her voice trailed off, and she wrung her hands. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Miss Vance, at the staircase. This is most significant. Did she see you?" Lily shook her head. "No, sir. I kept to the shadows and hurried away. I didn't want to be caught lingering." Poirot nodded, dismissing her with thanks, his mind already turning to Clara Vance's guarded demeanour. Her presence near the staircase suggested she knew more than she had admitted, and Poirot resolved to confront her. He found Clara in the music room, seated at a grand piano, her fingers tracing the keys without playing. Her dark eyes met his with a flicker of defiance, as if she anticipated his purpose. "Miss Vance," Poirot began, his tone measured, "you have been less than forthcoming. Lily saw you near the library staircase at dawn yesterday. A curious place and hour for a stroll. What were you doing there?" Clara's fingers paused, and she closed the piano lid with deliberate care. "I told you, Monsieur Poirot. I was restless and took a walk. The manor is stifling at night, and I often wander its corridors. I saw nothing of note." Her voice was steady, but Poirot noticed a faint tremor in her hand, and more intriguingly, a smudge of ink on her sleeve. Black, like the ink of the threatening note found on Charles' body. "Indeed," Poirot said, his smile enigmatic. "And yet, you were near a passage that leads directly to the scene of a murder, and this ink on your sleeve, it matches that of a certain note. Perhaps you wrote it, hoping to warn Charles of danger." Clara's eyes widened, but she recovered swiftly. "You are mistaken, monsieur. I write letters, not threats. As for the staircase, I was merely passing by." Poirot did not press further, sensing her defences were formidable, but not impenetrable. The ink was a vital clue, linking Clara to the note, yet her motive remained elusive. Was she protecting Charles, or deflecting suspicion from herself? He filed the observation away, turning his attention to another potential witness, Dr. Henry Thornton. The doctor was in the drawing room, reviewing medical notes by the firelight. Poirot approached, his manner courteous but direct. "Dr. Thornton, you are a man of observation, trained to notice what others miss. Tell me, have you seen anything in this house that struck you as unusual in the days before Charles's death?" Thornton set aside his papers, his expression thoughtful. "I've been preoccupied with the village cases, Monsieur Poirot. But there was one thing. Last week I saw Grayson leaving the manor at an odd hour, near midnight, carrying a small parcel. He seemed furtive, glancing over his shoulder. I thought it peculiar for a butler to be out so late, but I had no cause to question him then." Thornton paused, then added, "Charles also seemed on edge when I saw him last. He asked if I'd ever treated a man for poisoning, which struck me as odd. Poisoning? Poirot's interest sharpened. Did he elaborate? Thornton shook his head. No, he brushed it off as a hypothetical question, but his unease was evident. Poirot thanked him, his mind racing. Grayson's late-night errand and Charles's mention of poison suggested layers of intrigue yet to be unravelled. Returning to the library, Poirot re-examined the crime scene, focusing on the cigarette case with its trace of lipstick. He compared the shade to samples from the household's women, discreetly obtained by Inspector Reed. Clara's lipstick, kept in her vanity, was a close match. A vibrant red, uncommon in the manner. This, combined with her presence near the staircase and the ink on her sleeve, painted a compelling picture. Yet Poirot cautioned himself against premature conclusions. He summoned Inspector Reed to discuss their findings. The staircase, the note, the cigarette case, Poirot said, his voice low. They point to someone within the manor, someone who knew Charles's habits and the house's secrets. Clara Vance is entangled, but whether as witness or accomplice, I am not yet certain. Grayson, too, bears watching. His nocturnal activities are suspicious. Reed nodded, his notebook filled with scrawled observations. And Fenton? His letter suggests a motive, but his fear seemed real. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Fenton is a shadow, perhaps cast by another to mislead us. The true killer is here, in this house, and they grow uneasy. We must watch them closely, Inspector. As night fell, Poirot stood by the library window, gazing at the darkened gardens. The unseen witness, Clara perhaps or another, had seen something critical. Yet fear or guilt kept them silent. The grey cells, ever active, were weaving the clues into a pattern. The staircase offered access, the note a warning, the cigarette case a personal touch. The murderer, Poirot knew, was close, their confidence shaken by his relentless pursuit. With each revelation the net drew tighter, and Poirot felt the thrill of the chase, certain that the truth was within his grasp. Chapter 7. The trap is set. The atmosphere in Crestwood Manor had grown taut as a violin string, each inhabitant moving with the guarded precision of one aware they were under scrutiny. Hercule Poirot, his grey cells humming with the clarity of impending revelation, stood in the grand drawing-room, its chandeliers casting a soft glow over the assembled household. The murder of Charles Ashbourne, with its intricate web of clues, the stopped clock, the hidden staircase, the ink-stained note, and the shadow of Roger Fenton, had brought Poirot to the cusp of unmasking the killer. To draw them out, he resolved to set a trap, one that would exploit the murderer's growing unease. Poirot had requested the presence of Lady Eleanor, Clara Vance, Dr. Henry Thornton, Mrs. Beatrice Lang, Lily, and Mr. Grayson, along with Inspector Reed and his constables, who were discreetly stationed in the adjoining rooms. The fire crackled in the hearth, its warmth at odds with the chill of suspicion that permeated the gathering. Poirot stood before the mantelpiece, his small stature commanding the room with an authority born of intellect. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice clear and resonant, "Hercule Poirot has gathered you here to announce a discovery. In the library, where Monsieur Charles met his tragic end, I have found a clue that points unmistakably to the murderer. This evening, I shall reveal it, and the truth will be laid bare." He paused, his keen eyes scanning each face. Lady Eleanor's strained composure, Clara's guarded intensity, Thornton's furrowed brow, Mrs. Lang's nervous fidgeting, Lily's wide-eyed fear, and Grayson's rigid formality. A murmur rippled through the room, but Poirot raised a hand for silence. "The murderer believes they have outwitted us, but they have left traces that cannot lie. The stopped clock, the hidden ledger, the note with its fresh ink, all are pieces of a puzzle that Hercule Poirot has assembled." He deliberately omitted specifics, watching for reactions. Clara's fingers tightened on her shawl. Mrs. Lang's lips pursed, and Grayson's hand twitched, betraying a flicker of unease. To heighten the pressure, Poirot continued, "This clue, it is in the library, hidden where only the guilty would think to look. I invite you all to join me there at 9 o'clock tonight, when I shall unveil it." He bowed slightly, dismissing the group, but his eyes lingered on Grayson, whose pallor had deepened, and Clara, whose gaze met his with a mix of defiance and apprehension. Inspector Reed, standing by the door, whispered, "A bold move, Monsieur Poirot. You think the killer will act?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "The guilty mind, Inspector, is like a cornered animal. It will move when pressed. We must be ready." As the household dispersed, Poirot and Reed finalized their preparations. Constables were positioned in the library's shadows, concealed behind heavy drapes and bookcases, with orders to watch for any attempt to tamper with the scene. Poirot had planted a decoy. A sealed envelope marked evidence and placed on the library desk, its contents inconsequential but designed to tempt the murderer into revealing themselves. At 8:30, Poirot took his place in the library, feigning a solitary examination of the crime scene. The room was silent, save for the ticking of a newly wound clock, a deliberate replacement for the tampered one. He moved to the hidden staircase, inspecting its panel, ensuring the constables could see him from their vantage points. The trap was set, and Poirot's heart quickened with anticipation. Minutes before 9, a faint creak echoed from the staircase. Poirot stepped back, his hand on his cane, as a figure emerged from the shadows. Mr. Grayson, his face pale, his eyes darting to the desk. He froze upon seeing Poirot, but before he could retreat, Reed's constable sprang forward, seizing him. His hand was a second dagger, its silver handle identical to the murder weapon, which he had retrieved from a concealed niche in the bookcase. "Monsieur Grayson," Poirot said, his voice calm but piercing, "you have walked into the trap of Hercule Poirot. This dagger, it is no coincidence, is it?" Grayson struggled briefly, then sagged in the constable's grip, his composure shattered. I only meant to retrieve it," he stammered. "It proves nothing." Poirot turned to the assembling household, who had been summoned by the commotion. Lady Eleanor gasped. Clara's eyes narrowed, and Mrs. Lang clutched Lily's arm. "It proves much," Poirot declared. "This dagger, hidden so carefully, links you to the crime. But let us return to the drawing room, where all shall be explained." Back in the drawing room, with Grayson under guard, Poirot addressed the group. "The murderer sought to confuse us with the stopped clock, to escape via the hidden staircase, to plant a note implicating another. But they did not account for the vigilance of Hercule Poirot." He turned to Clara. "Mademoiselle Vance, you suspected Grayson, did you not? The ink on your sleeve betrays your attempt to warn Charles with that note. But you were too late." Clara's face softened, and she nodded. "I overheard Grayson threatening Charles about money days ago. I wrote the note to scare Charles into leaving, but I couldn't bring myself to accuse Grayson directly." Her voice trembled, and Poirot inclined his head, acknowledging her candor. He faced Grayson, whose defiance was crumbling. "Monsieur Grayson, you will tell us why you killed Charles Ashbourne, or shall I do so?" Grayson's shoulders slumped, but he remained silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. Poirot continued. "The Ledger's RF was a misdirection, was it not? You used Roger Fenton's name to extort Charles, exploiting his fear of an old scandal. When he threatened to expose you, you struck at dawn, using the staircase to vanish unseen. The second dagger was your insurance, hidden in case the first was traced." Grayson's silence broke. "He was going to ruin me," he cried. "I served this family loyally, but Charles mocked me, refused to pay what he owed. I had no choice." Reed signalled for the constables to take him away, his confession sealing his fate. Lady Eleanor, tears in her eyes, approached Poirot. "Monsieur, you have saved us from further darkness. How can we thank you?" Poirot bowed. "The truth, madame, is its own reward. Hercule Poirot seeks only to restore order." As the household dispersed, Poirot lingered, his mind already turning to the journey back to London. The trap had worked, the killer unmasked, but the cost of truth weighed heavily on Crestwood Manor. The grey cells, ever vigilant, had prevailed, and Poirot felt the quiet satisfaction of a puzzle solved. Chapter 8. The Truth Unveiled. The grand drawing-room of Crestwood Manor, bathed in the soft glow of lamplight, seemed to hold its breath as Hercule Poirot prepared to lay bare the final truths of Charles Ashbourne's murder. The household, still reeling from the dramatic unmasking of Mr. Grayson in the library, gathered once more, their faces a tableau of relief, sorrow, and lingering unease. Lady Eleanor stood by the fireplace, her hands clasped tightly, while Clara Vance sat with a quiet intensity, her eyes fixed on Poirot. Dr. Henry Thornton leaned against a bookcase, his medical composure strained, and Mrs. Beatrice Lang hovered near Lily, whose tear-streaked face betrayed her shock. Inspector Reed, flanked by his constables, stood guard over Grayson, whose earlier defiance had crumbled into a sullen silence. Poirot, his small frame commanding the room, began with the measured cadence of one unveiling a masterpiece. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice clear and resonant, "the crime that has shaken this house was no act of impulse, but a carefully orchestrated performance designed to deceive. Yet, as Hercule Poirot has said, the truth cannot hide from the grey cells. Let us reconstruct the events that led to the death of Monsieur Charles Ashbourne." He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. The stopped clock at 5:30 was the first deception, meant to obscure the true time of the murder, closer to 5 o'clock, as the medical evidence confirms. The hidden staircase, known only to a few, provided the killer's escape, ensuring no one saw them leave the library. The note, with its threat of betrayal, was a clever misdirection, and the ledger's entries to RF pointed to a phantom, Roger Fenton, a convenient scapegoat. Poirot turned to Grayson, whose head was bowed. "Monsieur Grayson, you were not the innocent butler you appeared. You assumed the initials RF to extort money from Charles, exploiting his fear of a past scandal linked to Roger Fenton. Charles, desperate and reckless, paid you for months, as the ledger reveals. But when he threatened to expose your scheme, you acted. At dawn, you met him in the library, under the guise of settling your accounts. There, you struck with the dagger, precise and lethal." Grayson's shoulders shook, but he did not interrupt. Poirot continued. "You stopped the clock to confuse the timeline, opened the window to suggest an outside intruder, and planted the note to cast suspicion elsewhere. The second dagger, hidden in the library, was your safeguard, should the first be traced. But you did not anticipate the vigilance of Hercule Poirot." He turned to Clara, his tone softening. "Mademoiselle Vance, you played a different role. You overheard Grayson's threats to Charles days before, and fearing for his safety, you wrote the note found in his pocket, hoping to frighten him into fleeing. The ink on your sleeve betrayed you, as did the lipstick on the cigarette case, which matched your own. You were in the actual library earlier that night. Were you not, attempting to warn him?" Clara's composure faltered, and she nodded, her voice barely audible. "I cared for Charles, despite his flaws. I saw Grayson speaking to him in hushed tones, threatening him over money. I wrote the note and slipped it into his pocket during dinner, but I couldn't bring myself to accuse Grayson outright. I was too late." Tears welled in her eyes, and Lady Eleanor reached out, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Poirot addressed the room. The cigarette case, with its trace of lipstick, was no mere coincidence. Mademoiselle Vance, you left it in the library during your attempt to warn Charles, a detail the murderer did not foresee. The hidden staircase, known to Grayson and Mrs. Lang, was the key to his escape, but Mrs. Lang's sighting of a figure in the garden, likely Grayson himself, staging the appearance of an outsider, further muddied the waters. Mrs. Lang, her face pale, interjected, "I swear, monsieur, I thought it was a stranger. I never imagined it was Grayson." Poirot nodded. "Your fear kept you silent, madame, but it was your observation that helped confirm the truth." Dr. Thornton, who had remained silent, spoke up. "And Fenton? Was he truly uninvolved?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. Monsieur Fenton was a shadow, used by Grayson to deflect suspicion. The letter found in his cottage was planted, and the telegram forged. Grayson knew of Fenton's past with the Ashbourne family and exploited it, believing it would lead us astray. Grayson, unable to bear the weight of Poirot's words, broke his silence. "It's true!" he cried, his voice hoarse with desperation. "Charles was going to ruin me. I served this family for years, but he treated me like a servant, mocking my demands for what he owed. I used Fenton's name to scare him, to keep him paying. When he threatened to go to the police, I had no choice. I didn't mean for it to go so far." His head dropped, and Reed signalled for the constables to secure him. Lady Eleanor, her voice trembling, approached Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot, you have brought light to this darkness. How can we ever repay you?" Poirot bowed, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "Madame, the restoration of order is my reward. The grey cells, they do not rest until justice is served." As Grayson was led away, the household dispersed, their relief tempered by the sorrow of betrayal. Clara, her confession easing her burden, thanked Poirot quietly before retiring. Thornton offered to check on Lily, who was still shaken, while Mrs. Lang busied herself with unnecessary tasks, seeking solace in routine. Lady Eleanor lingered, gazing at a portrait of Charles as a boy, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Poirot, preparing to depart for London, stood by the manor's entrance, his overcoat buttoned against the evening chill. Inspector Reed joined him, shaking his head. "You're a marvel, Monsieur Poirot. I'd have chased Fenton to the ends of the earth, if not for you." Poirot smiled. "The truth, Inspector, is like a diamond, hidden in the rough, but revealed with careful cutting. We have polished it together." As he boarded the waiting car, Poirot glanced back at Crestwood Manor, its silhouette stark against the twilight. The case had been a tapestry of deception, woven with greed, fear, and misplaced loyalty, but his grey cells had unravelled it, thread by thread. With a final nod to the manor, he settled into the car, his mind already turning to the next challenge, confident that no secret could long escape the meticulous order of Hercule Poirot.